Welcome back, everybody. In the final session and keynote conversation, our speakers, Anne Luther and Eiloghosa Obobaifo, will be discussing the Digital Benin project and what we can learn about methods of cataloging non-Western art. Alex Morrison, digital media producer and ICRA board member, will moderate the conversation. Over to you.
Thanks so much. New thinking about the Catalogue Raisonné. This is pushing the boundaries a bit, I think. But what Digital Benin has in common with all the things that have been discussed today is the systematic exploration of a corpus. And in this case, it's in a digital form. I'm, as Matthew said, my name's Alex Morrison. I'm part of a company called COGAPP, and we spend our lives putting stuff online. And we've done lovely projects. We've been privileged to work on all sorts of amazing things. I don't often see things online, and I think, I really wish I'd done that. And if I had done that, I probably wouldn't have done it as well as it has been done. I think the Digital Benin project, ever since I saw it first, has been an absolute beacon and a landmark in the exploration of what you can do with a digital resource, putting material online. I think it's technically accomplished. I think it's very ambitious in scope, not just in cataloging, but in the accompanying material that goes with it. It's groundbreaking in terms of its scholarship. It's incredibly culturally relevant. But it's also, and I think this is very important, it's playful and engaging. Not many projects that we've discussed today include a colouring book, but I'd highly recommend people to consider doing that. It's lovely. So I'm thrilled and excited to be moderating this session. The way it's going to work, so Anne and Eiloghosa are going to talk about the project and take you through it a bit. Then we're going to have a discussion on the stage. Then we will throw it open to your questions, which I hope there will be many of. We'll allow as much time as we can for that. We're running a bit over time, so we're going to still take an hour, and then the conference will wrap up, and then there'll be some drinks afterwards, so please stay around. I think that's enough of introduction from me. So I'd like to hand over to Anne Eiloghosa to talk us about the project.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having us here. So as Alex said, first we're sort of giving you a very brief overview because the project is quite complex, but we just want you to have a good idea so you can go home and explore the platform by yourself and hopefully come back many, many times to explore it afterwards. So let's jump right in. What is Digital Benin? So Digital Benin unites all identified historical objects from museum collections worldwide to provide the most accurate overview of the royal artifacts from the Benin Kingdom looted in the late 19th century. The digital platform associates the objects and their data with rich documentary and archival material. And the historic Benin objects are an expression of Benin arts, culture, and history, and were originally used as royal representational arts to depict historical events, to communicate, to worship, and perform rituals. I'm just going to stop my time here. Digital Benin's scope focuses on objects looted by British forces during the invasion of the Kingdom of Benin, now Edo State, Nigeria, in February 1897, and distributed in its immediate aftermath. Together, these events and processes led to the worldwide translocation of these objects shown on the platform. And a small set of objects is included in the catalogue to represent the broader context in which the artistic production of Benin guilds is situated. The digital platform also introduces new scholarship as a recontextualization of the objects, and it is Edo-centric, which will be introduced in more detail by Eiloghosa in this presentation. And we connect digital documentation about these objects to oral histories, to object research, historical contexts, a foundational Edo language catalog, provenance data, a map of the Benin Kingdom and of the museum collections worldwide that currently hold these objects. Our key concepts for the development of the platform are to add research and a contextualization of the objects, as we can show that Edo-centric research is really underrepresented in the museum data that we worked with. We present indigenous knowledge in visual, spoken, and written language. The platform shows over 80 oral history videos and an Edo language catalog for the objects, which Eiloghosa will introduce to you. And we have also a reference space for Benin history from an indigenous perspective using Benin-authored sources exclusively that was conducted by our colleague Godfrey Ekator. We're also connecting museum and archival data, which generally in the field of museum data is not currently a standard practice. Today we've seen a few projects where this is happening, but that is not sort of a standard practice that we can find generally in museum collections online. Our archive connects over 5,000 archival documents of 51 institutions, including archival photographs, letters, auction catalogs on the platform. And we're continuing to identify provenance names, specific objects, and object groups in these documents, which are then also linked in the catalog. And our colleague, Imogen Carlson, who is here today, she conducted the research on the archival materials. Our audience is the Edo community. We focus on also building the platform with a sort of accessibility in slow and limited internet access. We have developed different forms of access, like visual, audio, as you mentioned, the printout that you can see here of language cards and coloring books. And our focus audience is obviously also the general public and general interest in these objects, the Edo community internationally, researchers, museum staff, students, policymakers, activists, historians, and more. So I want to very briefly introduce you to our sort of timeline and process. We started the project in 2020 with a generous funding of the Ernst von Siemens Foundation for an initial 2 years, and then with an extension from the foundation for a third year. And in these initial 2 years, the big challenge was to get the data from the museum. So we worked with over 200 museums. We have now 136 collections on the website, and we have over 400 data sets on the website because museums work oftentimes with different data sets that they have internally and then online and then also in their API, and then internally they also use different data sets for their images, for example, and their exhibition data. So you can see in the first 2 years, the data collection was really a large part of what we were doing, the research, the field research in Benin City, and the object research, of course, was part of this. We prototyped and developed the platform from the data up and from the research up. So we didn't have a fixed sort of idea in the beginning, but we really developed the platform through the research in Benin City and through the conversations between the research and the technical team that we have. In 2023, we received generous funding from the Mellon Foundation to continue our research for 3 more years and also focus on the development that will be released in open source tools for the wider community who also are working on provenance data and bringing sort of object data together from communities of origin. So we are releasing tools in about 1.5 to 2 years from now to make the digital Benin model accessible also beyond this project. A major challenge facing that we had in the beginning, as I said, is to bring together and produce data for over 5,000 objects from 136 institutions in over 20 countries. and to make them searchable in a single catalog, because one of the sort of key aspects of of this project is that we wanted to find a way where we are not sort of editing and standardizing the data that we've received from the museums. So we did not change any of the data from the museums. We showed even data fields that were empty, because I think there is a lot to say when you see that certain information are there, certain information are not there. So what do you see when you don't see information? And of course, now that we've seen sort of 400 data sets, we can say that there is no standard for vocabularies or for databases in museums. And here are just some of the sort of different standards and different ways to access data in the museum world or field. What we have done is we created a connection or translation layer on the metadata level that makes it possible to search fields. We also built in an elastic search through this concept of we meet the data where it's at. We were not dependent on any technical skills coming from the museum, so it was very easy for them to give us their exports. We worked with any format of data. Sometimes it was just a PDF or even an email that we could then bring into the connection layer that we have built. And for this sort of data, for the connection layer that we've built, I know it's a little bit abstract, but when you're going into the catalog, I think you can see the connections that we have made. Here's a screenshot where you can see on the left-hand side, this is our research data. And on the right-hand side, this is the institutional data. And then the sort of golden fields on the left-hand side in the institutional data is the connection that we've built to the field that we have received from the museums. So we have built a database where you can search within the institutional data, but also across these many institutions. The key figures are that we have over 12,000 images on the platform. We have over 5,000 archival documents. We have 86 oral history videos and also 3D models. And I will not sort of walk you through the homepage briefly, because I will give my time now to Eiloghosa, Obobaifo, and while she is presenting, I will go live onto the platform and leave my slides.
On the platform, we have 8 different sections that you can go through. However, I'll be talking on just 2 because of time, and one of them is the oral history space. And the oral history space has been created to tell our story as Benin people the way we want it to be told. Benin people teach and learn about their history and culture through oral accounts passed down from one generation to another. These accounts have been preserved for centuries. The oral history sets the tone for collection of indigenous knowledge through the interactions with the past and contemporary culture of the Benin people. The oral tradition is a fundamental to the Benin-centered and Benin-centric perspective for understanding the historical and cultural importance of the Benin bronzes. The idea behind the collection of this oral tradition is to emphasize the historical significance of the Benin objects as an integral part of the Benin society as a living culture. This culture is often encountered during rituals, ceremonies, and recreational activities. Moreover, the culture of the Benin people has historically been recounted from one generation to another through spoken word. When these oral histories are related based on objects as representation, the objects reveal the circle of memory and creativity that emphasizes the significance of the objects to Benin society through the need for their production use, production, use, and the function they play. Our colleague, as Anne mentioned, Godfrey Ekato, led the oral history research in Benin City with the assistance of Mabel Oviaon. And they developed an in-depth research for the collection of indigenous knowledge through the interaction between the researchers and contributors on aspects of the culture of Benin people in the past 3 years, and are continuing to speak and interview people in Benin City and surrounding areas rather. The oral tradition that have been collected for the Digital Benin platform are unique aspects of the Benin approach to documenting the history and culture that the historical objects are embedded in and originate from. This is significant for the Digital Benin because most of the contributors of these oral histories either narrated stories that have been already documented as secondary sources or brought in personal perspectives without alterations to the facts. Another space on Digital Benin that I'll also speak on is the Eiloghosa space. We developed another research space that is based on research in Benin City, namely the Eiloghosa space, that otherwise known as Edo designation. This space represents historical objects in their accurate Edo designation, which results in object categories that employ terminologies distinct from that of museums or outside of Nigeria. The object groups formed by their Edo designation are shown visually, expressed verbally, and described in writing. The naming of historical objects in their Edo setting is the subject of this fundamental research. Eiloghosa means foundation, and in this context, it can be understood as a foundation to fill in the gaps in institutional knowledge, creation, current museum data, or even the omission of spoken, visual, and written Edo language concerning these objects. By providing the Edo designation of the objects and outlining their use, purpose, creation, and art historical interpretation in the introductory paragraphs, this section aims to provide insight into the cultural value of these objects. Users can gain and view an overview of the individual objects owing to the visual description. I want to walk you briefly through some of the process we took to develop the research and to find Edo designations. We started out with discussions with Professor Kokuri Erafuna, who is also a principal investigator in our project and a specialist on the historical objects. Together with her, we reached out to consultants from fields of linguistics, local historians, and others, for example, guild members who are still producing objects in Benin City today. Another part of the field research was a collaborative effort with the National Commission for Museums and Monuments in Benin City and Lagos. We were able to review their catalog cards. These are physical cards that were hand-typed between the 1950s and 1980s, and they represent the original inventory of the objects that includes fields for the object material, description, and catalog number. The review was between 2,000 and 3,000 catalog cards that were sorted through, scanned, archived, and transcribed. The catalog card references to the Edo language were misspelled, had letters omitted or switched around, or even both. It became clear that no native Edo speaker had documented the objects, and the description of the objects lacked information on their historical, production, use, and functions. It was important for us to incorporate spoken language because the vocalizations voiced by man and woman highlights the way in which Edo is first and foremost a spoken language, and also improves accessibility for different audiences. Since Edo is mostly a spoken language, tone affects how words are understood. It requires undertaking unique study on the meaning and linguistic and ethnographic context of the artifacts in order to include spoken language in the digitization process. Field research, expert consultation, and peer evaluation and media production workshops were all included in the research plan that was designed. We began creating vocabulary for the objects in a standardized written and spoken language, since the misspellings were more evident that the written form of the Edo language is insufficient for a continuous standard to describe the objects. It also became clear that indigenous names are not frequently listed for objects in museums, in online and digital databases. We concentrated on using spoken language to correctly identify the objects. This is because Edo is a context-sensitive language. For this project, we decided on a consistent method of defining an object with a more general description and its usage context. We also incorporated visual language in the editor space, and this included drawings by an Edo artist, Osaze Amadasun, to show a visual grouping that is based on the Edo language groups. And he also developed the coloring book and the language cards. To summarize, Eyoto and the Edo designation are particularly important, as this offers a space where the objects can be seen and identified within the context of Edo language that were originally made and used within, and we situate them within Benin-centered knowledge. Eyoto also provided a space where Edo speakers could interact with thousands of objects through the Edo language, written, spoken, and visual, for the first time in 128 years in this form and with this access. Digital Benin also enhanced the information that was present before now and brought this data into perspective locally. In the sense that they are now represented in an Edo-centric manner that will show that these are not only as objects, but as part of a people's living culture. We would like to invite everybody to try and look into the website and gain more insights on all the various spaces we are not able to highlight today.
Yeah, I want to just briefly introduce the team to you. We have our principal investigators who initiated the project. We're working currently with our staff, which are our researchers who are working rigorously with our technical team, and as Eiloghosa also mentioned, Osaze contributed to the overall design and visual language of the platform. Of course, our consultants are an integral part of the platform, and we're working remotely in 7 countries. We see each other regularly now, but we started out in the pandemic. And it was also sort of during a time where museums first started to reckon with their own data and what they put online. So when we started to ask for data, it was maybe a little bit of a different time than we're now in. The project is hosted and was initiated by the Museum am Rotenbaum, and you find all of our sort of documentation about the processes and methodologies also online, and our bibliography here as well. So yeah, just a brief sort of overview. We really hope that you're diving into the platform directly.
I'm just going to use the microphone so I've got some topics that I'd like to talk to Alan Eiloghosa about to expand on this, and then we'll open the conversation up to the audience. So thank you so much for that. I remain completely overawed by the scope and the ambition of the project and the approach that you've taken. There are obviously similarities with things that we've been discussing already today. I just start with a mundane one. You've obviously had to deal with hundreds of museums here, and you're publishing their material. How did you license that material, and what are the copyright arrangements around that?
Yeah, maybe I can speak to this. We asked the museums for the licenses, and we do not own the data. We didn't change the data into open data. So we really sort of, as I said before, worked with anything that the museums would be willing to share with us. And some of the museums were, giving us their standard sort of licensing agreement, but we really collaborated with the museums on giving us the possibility to display their materials with their licensing, may it be open or whatever license they have on their images. We clearly show the licenses in the institutional pages, so we're just sort of presenting the materials that they shared with us. And we asked them to partner with us, so we don't have to ask for the permission to display this information in 5 years, for example. So the institutions really came through and gave us permission for as long as the website is online to display these.
Thank you. That's very encouraging to hear. Again, because what you're doing is similar in some ways to what the catalog, the traditional Catalogue Raisonné project is doing, the same issues must arise around authentication and fakes and omissions and so forth. Has that been an issue that you've had to address?
Yeah, our colleague Imogen Coulson is here. She worked rigorously on setting a very clear scope for the objects that we're bringing onto the platform. And then because we're only working really with museum data, we decided not to work with private collections. Only if we only have one private collection on the platform where the provenance was very clear of the object. It was a well-known object, but we are working with institutions that have sort of the specialists in their museums already that sort of gave us the confidence, or where sort of questions arose, we worked with consultants. We had a rigorous review process on which information we're bringing online in the scope of the project.
One thing that comes through completely in your presentation, particularly in Eiloghosa's account of the project, is the Edo-centric nature of the work you're doing. I'd be interested just to hear a bit more about how it's been received in Edo province and in Nigeria more generally.
Well, since we went online, the platform has become a major research resource for students, for enthusiasts of Edo history. And in 2022, we had a project that's an outreach project that used Digital Benin as the main resource tool. And this project actually was for secondary school students across various schools in Benin City, and also university students, particularly the University of Benin and the University of Ibadan, has adopted. Most of the lecturers in the art history department, linguistic departments have also used Digital Benin as a resource material. So going back to the guilds, because during when we were gathering data and doing our research and field work in Benin City, we actually engaged the guild members who are still producing today. And when we came online, we took back the project to them to show them, and they were fascinated and they were so happy to see all the objects we have gathered in one place. And they also kind of drew inspiration from these objects, because bulk of their work today is trying to recreate these historical pieces. However, but there are still new contemporary influences to them, and they were very excited to see things that they have never seen before, because of these people really don't have access to them, but now they have access because of Digital Benin.
And you mentioned the guilds. The guilds are the producers of particularly of the bronzes, I think, and others as well.
The bronzes, the ivory and wood objects, yes.
And you also spoke about oral history projects and talking to the guild members. Were there any boundaries of what you were allowed to know?
Yes, definitely. Benin has so much secrecy around culture and traditions and things that could be publicly known, or even things that a particular gender is not supposed to know. So there were restrictions, but we were able to gather the important information that didn't require us to know this or require us to, dig deeper for the secret parts. So yeah.
And another area where this project has similarities with other things that have been discussed is just the obvious one about longevity and how to keep the thing online. Where are you at in terms of that, Anne?
We've built in a sustainable plan into our budget. So we have sort of budget after we conclude the current funding for keeping the platform online, for maintaining it. And we've also thought about sort of, what was discussed here as well today, for example, an offline version that we're bringing into partners like the Institute for Benin Studies. So it is sort of an archive that is locally accessible, that the library at the Institute will then make accessible on local computers. We have printed material on the website. So there are sort of these offline possibilities. There are others that we're currently thinking about, and they're, sort of that we hope to partner with museums. But the sort of sustainability plan and the offline version of the digital content that we have, also high resolution images that you, for example, can only access locally, will be in that sort of sustainability.
You've been working on the project now for a few years. The place you started from and the place you are at now, they must be very different in terms of what you imagined you might be able to produce and what you have been able to produce and the challenges that you've faced. I'd be really interested to hear from both of you about what the surprises have been and what the challenges were that you didn't necessarily anticipate.
When we started, there was a small group of people in the museum world that was thinking about museum data. That has shifted completely, of course, because of the pandemic, because of the sort of online capacities that we have now. we started out by this idea that we could have a feedback loop to the museums, and because the technology was there, we could have built it. But the reality in museums was that the technical staff was just not there to build sort of API keys and that accessibility. We only have 8 museums that have that technology currently in our catalog. So we had to quickly shift sort of our technology or the possibilities that we had and that we could build and that we could develop into the museum realities and what the data that we have received. I think that for me was one of the sort of key tech understanding, that sometimes your enthusiasm for technology does not meet or the reality in museums. And then of course the awareness that we have built around access to materials. So for example, digital doesn't necessarily mean online. Who is the owner of those materials when we're also talking about sort of the restitution processes of these objects. These were conversations that we had with our peers, especially in Benin City, that we were really considering. We built in, for example, also with the consultant, I can maybe sort of show you an example, or maybe it's too complex. But we've received sort of language that was not, that we wouldn't want to necessarily display on a website about objects from colonial histories without contextualizing the language that is used, without also sort of giving prompts to practitioners in the museum field on how to use language differently, how to contextualize sort of words differently when describing objects like this. So we have built that sort of technology also into the platform. And those were just sort of complexities that we encountered while we were working really with the material at hand and with the awareness that the Edo community and our researchers sort of brought to the technology side of the project. So there was a steep learning curve for all of us.
For me, on the research side, it was quite fascinating to see how much we could get and how much we were able to produce in the first 2 years, which led us to understand that I think 2 years would not be enough to put everything we have gathered or discovered out. So shifting from just a catalog, having just the objects as a catalog, and now having more information, historical backgrounds, production, use of these objects, all this information gave us more. We discovered that we had so much more that we needed to do and add, and this also bettered the archival documentations, and that's our colleague Imogen Coulson worked on. So looking back to where we started from and where we are now, it seems longer than 3 years, but but it's just been 3 years.
Very good. Thank you. I think one more question from me, and then I think I'd like to open it up to the audience, to whoever else would like to come in. I suppose what I'm really interested in is the work that you've done. So you've taken material from the museums and you've reinterpreted it through this research in the Edo community to really understand the material, really understand the objects and what they mean and how they should be classified. Has that gone back to the museums? Have the museums responded to that work?
Yes and no. We have worked with research that was conducted in museums that was really, really helpful. Then these researchers, so again, realities in museums. Some museums had specialists on staff that knew these objects. Some museums just don't have that. So the feedback into their own sort of databases just on a staff level was not possible. I think the awareness about this project and also about the context of the project is something that museums just cannot escape anymore. I think the project has shifted an awareness about sort of the context of these objects in institutions. And so with that reality, museums can definitely, or are currently, I want to say some museums are currently working. The feedback that we have received from curators, for example, is that they love to work with our catalog because it is so much easier accessible than their own databases. And it gives them possibility to see the objects in, for example, the Eiloghosa grouping, which then gives them the possibility to compare their own objects across institutions. So for their provenance research, for the contextualization of the objects, it is that was the sort of the feedback that we have received was important work, but more so really the context in which the objects are standing as the restitution discourses are progressing. The project really gave an awareness to the context of these objects.
Thank you so much. I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. And is somebody able to collect questions from anyone online?
Hi. I'm just curious about whether there are any plans to integrate the amazing work you've done with the new planned Royal Palace Museum and storage facility.
Alex wants to go home. So we have been in conversation with, so this is a research platform, and we've been in conversation about the future partner of this platform. So who in Nigeria will be our partner. And because it is a research platform, we are looking for the sort of research community. We in Nigeria as a sort of future partner. Of course, in terms of the sort of display of the platform in institutions in Nigeria, we have mostly, and also in collaboration, we've worked with the national museums and monuments on the digitization of their works, on the sort of transcriptions that Eiloghosa just mentioned of their catalog cards. They are great partners of the project. So our conversation at the moment is with them as an institution, sort of when it comes to the objects. Yeah.
I've just got a question on that point, which is you mentioned the inconsistencies between the metadata around the objects, but also did you find the same problem occurring in terms of the visual representations of the objects that the museums had, in terms of the different style, the different quality, whether there actually were any or not, and how did you overcome those if there were any?
Sure. Yeah, museum realities, right? Some of the images that we have are print quality, because they have been used in printed materials. Some of the images are reference images, sort of just for inventory. Some of them are drawings from catalog cards that we've received. Some of them are just sort of when the museums didn't have any of or any images readily available. Some curators were partnering with us to just send us snapshots from the installation that they had in the museums. Some reproduced images, in this context, but also I think in a timely context of the discourse that we're currently in. So they have been, and we've brought all of these online. So the image quality differs vastly, and they are reference images for us to sort of have that comparison. The only digitization that we've done was in the museum in Lagos and in Benin City, because we only had images that were taken for printed materials. And so we worked with 2 photographers from Lagos to digitize the collection there.
And did the existence of the project at all encourage institutions to digitize their own holdings? By them spontaneously, shall we say?
I think I don't believe it is only the project, but it is the context in which the objects are currently standing in. Because I know that some of the institutions, for example, in Germany, that have agreed to restitute the objects, then all of the sudden had funding to digitize and produce 3D models and images of the objects and so on. So I don't think the project is not necessarily the only sort of stimulation for the digitization of these objects. But again, museum reality, so it really depends on the institution that you're speaking to.
First of all, congratulations to your beautiful website, so functional and easy to use and packed with content. I would just like to ask how you chose your web designers and how you collaborated.
The web designer is an Edo man who is an artist living in Lagos, Ozaze Amadazun. He has been working with the material and the research material of these objects for many years in his own work. And so the sort of research knowledge that he had and the knowledge of the objects was key for us to work with this Edo artist on the visual language that you find throughout the entire website. We had 2 teams of developers. In the first phase, we worked with 2 developers who came from the Meta Lab at Harvard University and then founded their own studio. They have been working for many, many years with cultural institutions, with communities of origin, with museums. And so that sort of technical understanding that is overlapping with the knowledge that is required to work in a project like this was an obvious choice to bring them into the project. And now we're working with Calibro, a studio in Italy, and they have been working with cultural institutions also for many, many years. They've also worked on oral history projects, on archival projects. And so it was the way that we have conducted this project is that the technical and the research team are working simultaneously together. So it's not like we have a bunch of researchers that are doing all the work and then we give this to a studio and then they develop the website. But we have from the very beginning and are continuing to develop tools, open source tools that we're releasing from the research. And then we develop them into digital tools and usability and access and so on. And so that understanding we needed to work with teams that were able to commit to a project like this and also already had that sort of experience in working in that way.
I was just wondering, this looks like a case for restitution when you see all of this information gathered together, and I just wondered if there'd been resistance at the outset from any of the institutions to participating for fear that that's what would end up happening, because it's really spectacular, so congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there has been. The majority of museums partnered with us, and the way that we could persuade the museums where we had resistance, but also sort of stalling or a little bit of a longer conversation, was that the museums that were open to do a project like this, we could then show that these museums have sort of, how can I say this? We leveraged these museums because they were really partnering with us. They wanted to give us the data. They wanted to be open. They wanted to collaborate and show also their own research. They wanted to show that collaborating with the community of origin can lead to a project like this, that sort of that involvement is how now also museums can work in their own museum practice. And so we had long conversations with museums that were skeptical, that sort of also, asked about the legal consequences of a project like this. And we worked with our consultants within our project as well on those questions to build that trust with the institutions that were that wanted to have a longer conversation. There was one institution that we worked with so we were able to find a lot of objects online, but also in archival materials. But when we found the objects online, we would always take a screenshot of the online catalogs, because there was an institution that took them offline after we contacted them. Some institutions didn't have all of their data online, and we received more objects that were shown online. So there's also that, where they were really opening up their internal databases for these informations for us. But these processes, yeah, we encountered them and were able to communicate with the institutions.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's been fascinating. I'm thrilled to have heard your presentation and to have been involved in this conversation. I think we've come to an end now for this session, and we're going to hand over to Sharon to wrap the conference up. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that last wonderful presentation. I wonder if those of us who started in the morning, looking over this whole day, possibly there could be some connections of rethinking of ways that we do Catalogue Raisonnés. I can't say anything because my head is so spinning with ideas, and I hope that for all of you it was interesting, informative, hopefully also inspirational. And please consider becoming a member of ICRA. We will have more things going on in the spring online, smaller spotlights, and thank you all for coming. Thank you, to all the speakers, to our wonderful sponsors, and invite you all to have a drink in the other room.